From the heights of corporate success to the depths of spiritual crisis, Ethan Caldwell's journey is a gripping tale of redemption and purpose. Watch as a high-flying executive in Singapore confronts ethical dilemmas that shake his world, leading to a transformative path that not only saves his career but ignites a movement of integrity across Asian business. This story of faith, courage, and second chances will challenge your perspective on success and inspire you to consider what truly matters in life and business. Jet-lagged and bleary-eyed, I stared at my reflection in the spotless windows of Singapore's Marina Bay Financial Centre. The man looking back at me wasn't the same confident executive who'd left Boston 3 years ago. My perfectly tailored suit couldn't mask the haunted look in my eyes, and the tropical humidity made my collar feel like a noose. "Mr. Caldwell, your 9 a.m. is waiting," my assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Another day, another meeting, where I'd have to pretend I hadn't lost my way entirely. 3 years ago, I jumped at the opportunity to head the Asia-Pacific division of Reynolds & Klein Consulting. It was the crown jewel of my 15-year career, prestigious title, 7-figure salary, exponential growth potential. My LinkedIn profile told a story of unbroken success. Harvard MBA, fastest ever promotion to partner, now the youngest regional CEO in the firm's history. What it didn't show was the cost. My marriage had ended before I left the States. "You're married to your job, Ethan, not to me," Sarah had said, leaving her ring on our granite kitchen counter. I'd convinced myself it was a necessary sacrifice for success. Now, at 37, I had everything I'd ever wanted professionally, and a growing void where my soul used to be. The crisis didn't come dramatically. It crept in through the quiet moments. Late nights alone in my luxury apartment overlooking the Singapore Strait, weekends filled with work because I had nothing else, the gradual realization that I couldn't remember the last time I genuinely laughed or felt alive. The breaking point came during a video call with my younger sister back home. "Edge," she said, using my childhood nickname, "when was the last time you prayed?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Our parents had raised us in church, but I'd left God behind somewhere between my first promotion and my last relationship. "I'm fine, Amy," I'd said automatically, but the words rang hollow. That night, alone in my 47th floor apartment, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I got on my knees. No eloquent words came, just a broken whisper. "God, if you're there, I'm lost." What I didn't know then was that God had been orchestrating events long before my desperate prayer. The next morning, my assistant handed me my schedule, including a lunch meeting with a potential client, a small faith-based NGO looking to scale their operations across Southeast Asia. I almost cancelled it, but someone made me keep the appointment. It was there in a humble local coffee shop so different from my usual luxury haunts that I met James Chen, a Singaporean pastor with a vision to transform the corporate world through biblical principles. He took one look at me and said something that shook my carefully constructed world. "Success isn't measured by the height of your achievements, but by the depth of your impact on others." I didn't know it then, but that lunch meeting would be the first step on a journey that would completely reshape my understanding of purpose, success, and faith. God was about to take my carefully planned life and turn it into something I never could have imagined, and I'm still amazed at how He used my professional crisis to lead me back to Him. The international business community in Singapore was a world unto itself, a gleaming ecosystem of expatriates and locals, all chasing the next big deal. My office occupied prime real estate in the financial district, but after that first lunch with James, I began to see my surroundings through different eyes. James introduced me to a diverse circle of Christian business leaders who met weekly in a small room above a traditional shophouse in Tanjong Pagar. There was Michelle Wong, a Malaysian tech entrepreneur who'd walked away from a lucrative IPO because it compromised her values. David Patel, an Indian venture capitalist who used his connections to support faith-based startups, and Anna Kim, a Korean HR director who quietly mentored young professionals struggling with workplace ethics. In Singapore, we're at the crossroads of Asia, James explained during one of our increasingly frequent conversations. God has positioned people like you here for a reason, Edge. He had a way of using my nickname that reminded me of who I used to be before success became my identity. My assistant, Lin Wei, noticed the changes first. "Mr. Caldwell," she said one morning, her usual professional reserve cracking slightly, "you seem different." Wei had been with me for 2 years, efficiency personified, keeping my life running with clockwork precision. What she didn't know was how much I'd come to rely on her quiet strength during my darkest moments. The corporate world I inhabited started feeling like a mission field. Each morning, I'd ride the elevator with dozens of young professionals, their faces reflecting the same desperate drive I'd carried for years. In the pristine hallways and glass-walled meeting rooms, I began to recognize the subtle signs of burnout and spiritual hunger I'd ignored in myself for so long. Late one evening, I found Wei still at her desk, staring at a family photo. Her teenage son had gotten into trouble at his international school, and she was torn between work commitments and family needs. Instead of my usual detached efficiency, I heard myself saying, "Go home, Wei, family comes first." The look of surprise and gratitude on her face made me realize how much I'd changed. Through James's network, I met Pastor Grace Tan, who led a small but growing congregation of professionals in the central business district. Her insights into the unique challenges faced by business leaders in Asia helped me understand how faith and career could coexist without compromise. "God doesn't want you to abandon your business acumen," she told me. "He wants to repurpose it." And the more I engaged with this community, the more I realized that my years of international business experience weren't a detour from God's plan. They were preparation for something I couldn't yet see. But first, He had more breaking to do, and the crisis I thought I was managing was about to intensify in ways I never expected. The first real test of my emerging faith came during our quarterly board meeting. Reynolds & Klein was preparing to acquire a smaller consulting firm in Thailand, and the due diligence report landed on my desk at midnight. Buried in the footnotes, I found evidence of systematic bribery, facilitation payments disguised as consulting fees. 3 months ago, I would have rationalized it away as standard practice in emerging markets, but now something in my spirit couldn't let it go. I spent the night praying and pacing my apartment, watching container ships drift across the strait like ghostly citations of my former certainties. "You can't be serious, Edge," Marcus Reynolds himself said when I raised the issue during the video call. His voice carried across 8 time zones with crystal clarity. "This is how business works in this part of the world. You know that." The other board members nodded, their faces floating in squares on my screen like a jury about to deliver a verdict. "I can't sign off on this," I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "We need to either walk away or demand complete transparency." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Take 24 hours to reconsider your position, Ethan. Think very carefully about your future with this firm." The threat was clear. I reached out to James, who listened without interrupting as I explained my situation. "The real question," he said finally, "isn't about your future with the firm, it's about your future with God." But the pressure mounted from all sides. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from board members and major shareholders. A senior partner from London flew in specifically to help me see reason. Meanwhile, our stock price ticked upward on merger speculation, and I knew my stance could wipe millions off the company's value. Wei, who had begun attending Pastor Grace's church, left a Bible on my desk, open to Matthew 6:24. "No one can serve 2 masters." The simplicity of the verse cut through my complexity like a knife through silk. The crisis deepened when I discovered that rejecting the Thai acquisition would likely cost not just my job, but also the jobs of several team members who had become like family. Mei Lin from compliance, who was putting her daughter through college. Raj from IT, who had just taken out a mortgage. Wei, who was still dealing with her son's school issues. One evening, I found myself in the tiny Taoist temple near my apartment, of all places. An elderly woman was lighting incense, her prayers rising with the smoke. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a rediscovering Christian, seeking clarity in a pagan temple. But God meets us in strange places, and it was there that I finally understood. This wasn't just about ethical business practices. This was about whether I truly believed God could be trusted with not just my future, but the futures of everyone who depended on me. I spent that night on my knees again, but this time with a different prayer. Lord, I trust you. Show me how to lead with integrity, whatever the cost. The next morning, I had to make my final decision. What I didn't know was that God had already set in motion events that would transform this crisis into an unexpected opportunity, not just for me, but for everyone involved. While the acquisition crisis loomed, other threads of my life were being rewoven in unexpected ways. My sister Amy called with news that our father had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. "He's been asking about you, Edge," she said. "He keeps saying he wants to see you before—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Dad had been my first model of Christian leadership. He'd run a small construction company in Boston, known as much for his integrity as for the quality of his work. When I was 12, I'd watched him turn down a lucrative contract because the developer wanted to cut corners on safety. "Son," he'd said, "there are some profits that cost too much." Now, 2 decades later, his words echoed with new meaning. Meanwhile, Wei's family situation had become more complicated. Her son, Michael, had been caught helping wealthy classmates cheat on exams in exchange for money. "I wanted to be like you, Uncle Ethan," he told me during a counseling session Pastor Grace arranged. "Smart, successful, respected." His words felt like a mirror reflecting my own misplaced values. The corporate ecosystem I inhabited began showing its own stress fractures. David Patel, the venture capitalist from our prayer group, confided that several Christian entrepreneurs were struggling with similar ethical dilemmas. "We need a new model," he said during one of our meetings. "A way to do business that honors God without retreating from the marketplace." Even my luxury apartment, once a symbol of success, became a place of unexpected ministry. I started hosting small gatherings of young professionals, initially just for fellowship, but increasingly for honest discussions about faith and business ethics. One evening, a junior analyst from a competing firm broke down crying. "I can't keep doing this," she sobbed. "Every day, I have to choose between my job and my conscience." Pastor Grace observed that these gatherings were filling a vital need. "These young people need to see that it's possible to be both successful and faithful," she said. "Your struggle is becoming their hope." Then came the unexpected reconnection with Sarah, my ex-wife. She had moved to Hong Kong for a fresh start and heard about my situation through mutual friends. Her email was brief. "I'm praying for you, Ethan. You're finally becoming the man I always knew you could be." Each of these subplots felt like threads being drawn together by an unseen hand, weaving a tapestry I couldn't yet see. The Thai acquisition deadline was approaching, but somehow these parallel stories were helping me understand that this crisis was about more than just one business decision. It was about a model of leadership that could transform not just my life, but potentially impact an entire generation of Asian professionals struggling to integrate faith and work. The turning point came in the most unexpected way. 2 days before my deadline with the board, I received an urgent call from Marcus Reynolds' assistant. Marcus had suffered a severe panic attack during a meeting in New York and was hospitalized. The news sent shockwaves through the company, and suddenly the pressing deadline seemed less important. That evening, as I sat in Pastor Grace's office discussing the situation, my phone lit up with a Singapore number I didn't recognize. It was Marcus himself, calling from his hospital bed in New York. Edge. His voice sounded different, vulnerable, stripped of its usual authority. I couldn't sleep, and I kept thinking about what you said about transparency. He paused, his breathing heavy. 25 years ago, I made my first compromise, just a small one, then another. Each time it got easier. The words seemed to cost him physical effort. I've built an empire on shifting sand, and it's all starting to crumble. The conversation that followed would change everything. Marcus shared how his own crisis of conscience had been building for years, masked by success and buried under layers of rationalization. His panic attack had forced him to confront the hollow core of his achievements. "I need you to do something for me," he said finally. "I need you to help me clean house, starting with Thailand, but not ending there. We need to rebuild Reynolds and Klein on a foundation of absolute integrity, whatever it costs us in the short term." I sat in stunned silence, watching the Singapore skyline glitter through my office window. This wasn't just an answer to prayer, it was a complete reversal of everything I'd feared. But Marcus wasn't finished. "There's more," he continued. "I want you to develop a new division. Focus on ethical business consulting, helping companies transition to transparent practices, especially in emerging markets. You've seen both sides now. You speak both languages. Use that." The next few hours were a blur of calls and video conferences. The board was informed of Marcus's decision, and while some members resigned in protest, others expressed relief, as if they'd been waiting for permission to change course. Our stock price would take a hit, but we could weather it. The most powerful moment came when I gathered my team to share the news. I expected fear, maybe even anger about the uncertainty ahead. Instead, Wei stood up first, tears in her eyes. "Mr. Caldwell, Edge," she corrected herself. "My son asked me last night why I still worked here. Now I can tell him why." One by one, others spoke up. Maylin from compliance revealed how she'd been praying for a change like this. Raj admitted he'd been updating his resume, torn between his paycheck and his conscience. The relief in the room was palpable. It felt like a collective exhale after years of holding our breath. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I received an email from James. He'd attached a photo taken months ago at that first lunch meeting in the coffee shop. In it, I looked lost, broken, desperate for answers. "Look how far God has brought you," he wrote. "This is just the beginning." He was right. What I'd seen as a professional crisis had become a divine appointment. God hadn't just saved my career, he'd transformed it into a platform for something much bigger than myself. The real work was just beginning. The immediate aftermath was both exhilarating and terrifying. News of Reynolds and Klein's ethical overhaul made waves across Asian business circles. Our stock dropped 18% in the first week, and several major clients suspended their contracts pending review of the new direction. But then something unexpected happened. A Japanese technology firm, known for its ethical stance, reached out about an exclusive consulting partnership. Their CEO had been following our transformation and wanted to be part of it. "Your courage," he wrote, "has given us courage." The personal consequences were just as dramatic. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from former colleagues worldwide. Some called me naive, others brave. A senior partner in London resigned, then called to ask if he could join our new ethical consulting division. "I want to be able to look my children in the eyes when they ask what I do," he said. Wei's son, Michael, started spending time at the office after school, watching how we handled difficult decisions. One afternoon, he confessed to his teachers about the cheating ring and accepted the consequences. "I learned from you, Uncle Ethan," he said. "Sometimes doing the right thing hurts, but it's still right." Pastor Grace's congregation saw an influx of young professionals, drawn by the story of what had happened at Reynolds and Klein. Our weekly gatherings in my apartment grew so large we had to move them to a proper venue. Something was stirring in Singapore's business community, a hunger for a different way of doing things. The most profound reactions came from unexpected quarters. A group of Thai businessmen, including some from the company we'd almost acquired, reached out through David Patel. They wanted to know more about building ethical businesses in challenging environments. "We've been waiting for someone to take this stand," their spokesman said. Sarah's response surprised me most. She flew in from Hong Kong for a weekend, and over coffee at Marina Bay, she shared her own journey. "Watching you choose integrity over success," she said, "healed something in me I didn't know was broken." While reconciliation wasn't in our future, we found a friendship deeper than our marriage had been. Marcus's transformation became a parallel story to mine. After leaving the hospital, he threw himself into the company's ethical reformation with the same energy he'd once devoted to expansion. "We're not just changing policies," he would say in our daily calls. "We're changing hearts." The costs were real. Our year-end bonuses were significantly reduced, and we had to let some people go who couldn't align with the new vision. But watching Wei explain to Michael how standing for truth was worth more than money, I knew we were part of something more valuable than profit margins could measure. The real work of transformation began in the months that followed. We discovered that building an ethical business was far more challenging and ultimately more rewarding than maintaining a profitable one at any cost. Our new ethical consulting division, which we named Integrity Partners, started with three major challenges. First, we had to develop a framework for helping companies transition to transparent practices without destroying their business. Second, we needed to build trust in markets where our reputation had been damaged. And third, we had to prove that ethical business could be profitable business. The breakthrough came through an unlikely source. During one of our professional fellowship meetings, Anna Kim, the Korean HR director, shared how her company had successfully transitioned from using facilitation payments to clean business practices in Vietnam. "We didn't just change our policies," she explained. "We changed our relationships. We learned to see our partners as people, not transactions." This became the foundation of our approach. We started working with companies at a deeper level, addressing not just their practices, but their culture. Marcus, now fully recovered, became our strongest advocate. His personal testimony of transformation opened doors that had seemed firmly closed. My own growth during this period surprised me. The more I taught others about ethical leadership, the more God revealed areas in my own life that needed attention. I learned to listen more than speak, to seek wisdom rather than quick solutions, and most importantly, to trust God's timing rather than my own ambitious deadlines. Wei stepped into a leadership role herself, heading our new mentorship program for young professionals. Her experience helping her son through his crisis gave her unique insight into the pressures facing the next generation of business leaders. "We're not just teaching them about business," she would say. "We're showing them how to live with integrity." One particularly meaningful project emerged in partnership with local universities. We developed a course called Ethical Leadership in Asian Markets, combining practical business skills with spiritual principles. The stories from our own transformation became case studies, and our mistakes became teaching tools. The most challenging growth came in learning to handle success differently this time around. When Harvard Business Review requested an article about our ethical transformation, I felt the old pride stirring. But during prayer one morning, God reminded me that this wasn't about building my reputation. It was about showing others a better way. James Chen, who had been my first guide on this journey, helped keep me grounded. "Remember," he said during one of our regular meetings, "God didn't save your career so you could build another kingdom. He saved it so you could help build His." This perspective was tested when we started receiving international recognition. Forbes ran a feature on our ethical consulting work. Business schools began using our case study. I was invited to speak at conferences across Asia. The temptation to let this become about personal success was real, but something had fundamentally changed in me. The growth wasn't just professional. My relationship with my father deepened as his health declined. During my monthly visits to Boston, we had conversations we'd never had before. "I always prayed you'd find your way back to God," he told me. "I just didn't expect him to use bankruptcy fears to do it." By the second year of our transformation, Reynolds and Klein had become known as the go-to consultancy for ethical business transitions in Asia. But God was preparing us for something bigger than we could have imagined. The catalyst came when the Singapore government announced a major anti-corruption initiative across Southeast Asia. They were looking for private sector partners who could help companies transition to fully transparent practices. Our track record made us natural candidates, but the scale of the project was daunting. During this time, my father's condition worsened. During one of my visits to Boston, sitting in his hospital room, he shared something that would prove prophetic. "Edge," he said, his hands trembling slightly. "God doesn't waste our winters. Your season of crisis wasn't just about you, it was preparation for this moment." Back in Singapore, our team gathered for an extended prayer meeting. Wei brought news that her son Michael had been elected student body president on a platform of academic integrity. David Patel revealed that several major venture capital firms were creating ethical investment funds. Anna Kim shared how Korean companies were increasingly seeking guidance on transparent practices. The pieces were falling into place, but there was an underlying tension. Taking on the government initiative would mean exposing ourselves to intense scrutiny. Our own transformation was still recent history, and not everyone believed it was genuine. Marcus flew in from New York for a crucial meeting with government officials. The night before, he gathered our core team in my apartment. 2 years ago, he said, I thought I was having a panic attack. Now I know it was God's hand at work. Tomorrow, we have the chance to help reshape business culture across an entire region. The pressure mounted as media attention increased. A prominent business journal questioned whether our ethical stance was just clever marketing. Former clients who'd left us during our transformation publicly doubted our ability to handle a project of this magnitude. Pastor Grace called an emergency meeting of our business fellowship. "This isn't just about consulting anymore," she said. "This is about showing the world that God's ways work in the marketplace." I found myself returning to that moment in the Taoist temple 2 years ago, when everything seemed to be falling apart. Now, standing on the brink of our biggest opportunity yet, I felt the same need for divine guidance. The night before our final presentation to the government committee, I received 2 messages. One was from Sarah. "You were born for such a time as this." The other was from my father's nurse. He had slipped into a coma. Standing at my window, watching the sun rise over Singapore's skyline, I knew we were approaching a moment that would define not just our company's future, but potentially the future of business ethics in Asia. The morning of our presentation to the government committee coincided with my father's passing. I received the call from Amy just an hour before we were scheduled to begin. In that moment, everything seemed to converge: grief, purpose, legacy, and calling. Marcus insisted I should fly home immediately, but something in my spirit knew I needed to stay. "Your father built his business on integrity," Pastor Grace reminded me. What better way to honor him than this? The presentation room at the Ministry of Trade was packed with government officials, business leaders, and media representatives. As I adjusted my tie, the one Dad had given me for my first job, Wei handed me a note from Michael. "Remember what you taught me, Uncle Ethan. Truth matters most when it costs something." I deviated from our planned presentation. Instead of beginning with statistics and strategies, I shared our story, all of it. The crisis, the fears, the temptations to compromise, and the transformation. I talked about my father's legacy of integrity and how it had taken me decades and a professional crisis to understand what he had tried to teach me. "We're not here just to consult," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We're here because we believe that ethical business isn't just possible in Asia, it's essential. We've made the mistakes, we've paid the prices, we've learned the lessons. Now we want to help others make this journey." Marcus then revealed something we'd kept private, data showing how our ethical transformation had actually improved our long-term profitability. "Integrity isn't just right," he demonstrated. "It's smart business." The climax came during the Q&A session. A senior government minister asked about the cost of ethical transformation. Before I could answer, Wei stood up. Breaking all protocol, she shared how our company's change had influenced her son's decision to confess to the cheating ring, and how that one act of integrity had created ripples throughout his school. Then, one by one, our partners began to stand. David Patel shared how our example had inspired a new generation of ethical startups. Anna Kim testified about the transformation in Korean corporate culture. James Chen spoke about the revival of ethical business practices he was witnessing across Singapore. The room fell silent when the minister raised his hand again. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "what you're proposing isn't just a consulting project. You're talking about changing the heart of how we do business in Asia." "Yes, sir," I replied, "because business isn't just about profits, it's about people. My father taught me that, but I had to lose everything to understand it." The minister looked around the room, then at his colleagues. Without consulting them, he stood up. "Mr. Caldwell, we don't just want you to consult on this initiative, we want you to lead it." In that moment, I felt my father's presence strongly. I could almost hear his voice. "Some profits cost too much, but some investments change everything." The media called it a breakthrough in Asian business ethics. Our stock price soared. But sitting in my office later that night, looking at a photo of Dad on my desk, I understood that this was something much more personal. It was the fulfillment of a generational legacy of integrity. 5 years have passed since that pivotal day at the Ministry of Trade. What began as a corporate ethical transformation has become a movement across Asia. Reynolds and Klein's Integrity Partners division now operates in 12 countries, helping companies navigate the challenging waters of ethical business transformation. The costs we paid in those early days have been repaid many times over. Not just financially, but in ways that matter more. Wei's son Michael is now studying business ethics at Harvard, with plans to return to Singapore and continue the work we started. The professional fellowship that began in my apartment has grown into a network of business leaders across Asia, all committed to doing business God's way. Marcus retired last year, but not before establishing the Reynolds Foundation for Ethical Business Leadership, which provides scholarships for young professionals committed to integrity in the marketplace. At his retirement dinner, he said something I'll never forget. "God didn't just save our company, He gave us a mission." I keep my father's picture on my desk, next to the Bible that Wei gave me during our crisis. Every morning, I touch both as a reminder of where this journey began. Dad's construction company, though small by worldly standards, built more than buildings. It built a legacy of integrity that now influences business practices across an entire continent. Sarah and I meet occasionally when she's in Singapore. She leads corporate ethics training in Hong Kong now, and we sometimes collaborate on projects. God healed our relationship in a different way than I expected, not by restoring our marriage, but by giving us both a shared purpose that's bigger than ourselves. The Singapore government's initiative exceeded all expectations, creating a model that other countries are now following, but more importantly, it's changing lives. Young professionals no longer have to choose between their faith and their careers. Companies are discovering that ethical business practices actually improve their bottom line. We're seeing a generation rise up that values integrity over instant profits. Looking back, I can see how God used my professional crisis to break me, rebuild me, and prepare me for something I never could have imagined. What seemed like an ending was actually a beginning. What looked like failure became the foundation for transformation. Today, as I mentor young business leaders across Asia, I often share what Pastor Grace taught me. Success isn't about what you achieve, it's about what you set in motion. Last week, Michael graduated summa cum laude, giving a commencement speech about ethical leadership that would have made his uncle Ethan proud. The movement continues to grow. Next month, we're launching a new initiative in partnership with 10 major Asian universities to integrate ethical business practices into their core curriculum. As I watch the sun rise over Singapore each morning, I'm reminded that God's plans are bigger than our crises, and His purpose prevails even in the marketplace. If you're struggling with addiction, questioning your faith, or wondering if God can use you, know that He can transform any life, any workplace, any situation. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope. Have your own story of transformation. Share it in the comments below. Your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.